Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning into Horror Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. When I was a teenager, my summers stretched out like endless roads. The days seemed longer back then, like the sun refused to set until every kid on the block had wrung the last drop of energy out of their bodies. I spent those summers biking through my neighborhood in Colorado Springs with my younger cousin and his group of friends. We'd ride until the air thinned in our lawns, weaving in and out of streets we knew like the backs of our hands, stopping at gas stations for cold sodas and candy we'd buy with the coins we pulled together from couch cushions and allowance money. That's how I met a boy named Jason. He wasn't part of our usual crew at first. He lived a few blocks away and sort of slipped into the group one day, riding an old BMX with peeling blue paint. He wasn't loud or demanding attention like some kids his age. He just smiled that boyish, lopsided smile and joined in like it was the most natural thing in the world. My name's Emily, and I never thought back then that someone like him could change the way I see people forever. Jason was a little older than me, maybe by a year, but he had that easy charm that made him feel approachable. He wasn't the kind of kid who dominated conversations, but he was quick to laugh, quick to fall in stride with you like he'd known you longer than a week. There was an ease about him, something that made you want to lean in when he started talking. I found myself watching him sometimes when we were all riding together. The way he'd pop his front tire up off the curb, how his hair would fall into his eyes until he shook it away. We started hanging out more and more, biking side by side, swapping jokes that weren't all that funny but felt hilarious because of who you were with, and sometimes just walking through the quiet residential streets that lined our part of town. He'd point out the houses where he thought cool families lived, the ones with basketball hoops in their driveways, or pools you could hear splashing behind tall fences. I'd tease him about the way he always stopped to tie his shoe, even though his laces never seemed loose. Little details like that made him feel normal, safe. There was nothing remarkable about him on the surface, and maybe that's what made him feel safe. He had that kind of smile that put you at ease, the type of smile you'd expect from someone who'd help you pick up your books if you dropped them in the school hallway. His jokes weren't edgy or cruel. They were the kind of silly, exaggerated stories kids tell, stretching the truth about catching a fish that was as big as his arm, or making up fake band names and pretending we're gonna star one someday. I even went with him to the Valentine's dance at our middle school. It wasn't romantic in the way adults think of romance. It was awkward hand-holding, shuffling back and forth to slow songs, trying not to step on each other's shoes. We laughed nervously when the teachers pretended not to see kids sneaking extra cupcakes from the refreshment table. Our mouths smeared with frosting we didn't bother to wipe off right away. At the time, he seemed like the definition of normal, just another boy growing up in our small corner of the world. As we got older, the natural drift began. It wasn't dramatic. I went to one high school, he went to another. Our circles branched out like separate rivers flowing away from each other. We didn't fight, we didn't have some big falling out. It was just life pulling us in different directions. By the time I was 16, Jason was more of a memory I stumbled on when flipping through old pictures, or when a certain street reminded me of bike rides past curfew. That summer, I had just gotten back from a party for my summer school group. The night before had been long, full of laughter and soda, and cheap pizza that tasted better because it was shared. I woke up the next morning groggy, my head heavy with leftover exhaustion, my throat dry from too much sugar and too low water. The air outside pressed down, the kind of July heat that makes the edges of houses shimmer like they're melting. I was halfway through brushing my teeth when I heard it. 3 sharp pops, muffled but distinct. Gunshots. I froze, toothbrush hanging from my mouth. Gunshots weren't exactly normal in my neighborhood, but they weren't completely unheard of either. Every so often, you'd hear fireworks mistaken for them, or once in a great while, the real thing. This time though, something about the sound set off alarms in me. They weren't playful or distant. They were deliberate. My heart pounded as I spit into the sink and rushed out to the kitchen where my mom was pouring coffee. The smell of it, warm and bitter, clung to the air, grounding me for a moment. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She frowned, her hand pausing on the pot. "Yeah, might be fireworks." But her voice trailed off, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. It didn't sound like fireworks. It sounded like something you couldn't brush aside. Within an hour, the sound of sirens rolled into the neighborhood. It started as a faint wail, then layered into a chorus as more joined in. I pressed my face to the window, forehead against the glass, and saw police cars streaming down the block that ran behind ours. Red and blue lights flickered against the pale walls of the houses, bending across the asphalt. My mom, with that look she gets when her instincts kick in, picked up the phone and called a friend who lived closer to where the noise had come from. I watched her face as she listened, eyes narrowing, mouth tightening, the crease in her forehead deepening with each word. When she finally hung up, she looked at me in a quiet, measured voice. "There's a situation, a hostage thing." I blinked at her, confused. "A what?" "Someone, a man. They're saying he hurt a woman, killed her, and the child." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Police are all over it." The world tilted sideways. My stomach sank, though I didn't know why yet. Then the name came. I don't even remember if it was from her or from the evening news that later confirmed it, but it hit me harder than the sirens or the word hostage. Jason, the boy I used to hold hands with, the one who laughed with me until my sides hurt, the one I once trusted enough to walk me home after a dance. He wasn't just involved, he was the one. He had murdered a woman, assaulted her child, and now he was holding police at bay, barricaded in a house just blocks away from my own. The shock didn't fit neatly anywhere in me. It pressed against the edges of everything I thought I understood about people. I wanted to reject it, tell myself it was a mistake, that there must have been another Jason, another face, some mix-up. But there wasn't. It was him, the same person who once seemed so harmless, so normal, so human. By that afternoon, the standoff was everywhere on the local news. SWAT vans lined the streets. Negotiators with bullhorns tried to speak through barricades, and the area was cordoned off with wide bands of yellow tape. The words "armed and dangerous" crawled across the screen under his mugshot, which was just a newer version of the boy I'd known. Same eyes, same mouth, but colder now, like something behind them had been burned away. I sat on the couch, numb, trying to square the memory of him leaning against his bike with the image of him in handcuffs. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends, all of us in disbelief, trading the same stunned sentences back and forth. "Did you hear? It can't be him. What happened to him?" But the truth was there, undeniable. He was taken into custody after hours of tension, but by then the damage was already done. A woman was gone, a child scarred forever, and the community, our community, was split wide open by the realization that monsters don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they sit beside you on swings, or walk you home under the soft glow of streetlights, or laugh with you over nothing at all. It's been years since that day, and still, I struggle with the questions it left behind. How can someone who once seemed so normal end up doing something so violent, so unspeakable? What changes in a person between holding hands at a dance and holding lives in their grip? I'll never know. What I do know is that I can still hear the sound of those gunshots in my head if I let myself sit in silence too long. I can still see his face in the grainy mugshot that ran on every news channel in town. And I can still feel the way the air shifted in my chest the moment I realized the truth. that the boy I once trusted, the boy who once felt safe to me, had become the person every parent warns you about, but no kid really believes in until it's too late. Jason is locked away now. I hope he stays there for the rest of his life. When I was 17, I thought I had the whole world in front of me. Summers blurred into weekends, weekends blurred into late-night parties, and every day felt like an excuse to stretch the limits of freedom just a little further. I was still in high school, still figuring out who I was, but like most kids that age, I thought I knew enough. I didn't realize how easily one night could cut into everything I believed about people. My name's Lauren, and I still replay this night in my head, even though it's been 4 years. It started with a small get-together at a friend's house on the west side of town, not too far from where I live with my parents. My older brother, Chris, and I were both invited. The house wasn't big, but it was enough. A one-story with a sagging porch and a yard that smelled faintly of cut grass and beer from past weekends. There were maybe 10 of us there, tops. It wasn't some huge, out-of-control party, just music, a few drinks, and people who mostly knew each other through mutual friends. The air inside was warm and buzzing with small conversations. Someone had brought a guitar, and a few people passed it around, strumming half-familiar chords while others tried to sing along in mismatched tones. There was vodka on the counter, plastic cups stacked unevenly next to it, and a bag of chips that got passed in circles until all that was left were crumbs stuck to the grease-stained bottom. I was never much of a drinker back then. At 5 feet 3 inches and barely 115 pounds, it didn't take much for alcohol to hit me. After 2 cups of vodka mixed with soda, I felt drowsy. My face buzzed with heat, and my body sagged, my limbs heavy like they'd been swapped with wet towels. Among the group was a guy named Aaron. He was older than most of us, 24, I think, though I didn't know him well. I'd seen him around before, mostly through Chris. They talked more than I ever did with him, and he had that kind of presence that slid into the background easily. At first, he seemed chill enough, quiet, relaxed, even funny when he wanted to be. He didn't push himself into the spotlight. He sat back, nursed his drink, laughed at jokes without ever being the one who started them. I didn't feel unsafe around him. He was just there. By midnight, I was fine to keep my eyes open. The music had softened to background noise, the chatter dwindling as people started to nod off in corners or on couches. My brother had drunk too much to drive us home, so the plan was to crash there. My friend, who was hosting, offered me her guest room, so I wouldn't have to sleep on the couch. I was grateful for it. I remember pulling the blanket up to my chin, the dull hum of conversation still drifting in from the living room, and thinking I'd fall asleep fast. But then the door opened. I blinked into the darkness, my stomach tightening when I saw Aaron stumble in. He was clearly drunk, his words slurred as he asked, "Mind if I crash here too?" I froze for a second. It was a big bed, technically, and I was too shy to object. Against my better judgment, I muttered, "Okay." He dropped onto the mattress, the springs groaning under the weight. I scooted as far to the edge as possible, clutching the blanket like it could shield me. He smelled like alcohol and stale smoke, the kind of smell that clings to clothes no matter how much you wash them. I hoped he'd just pass out, but instead he started talking, rambling nonsense about music, old friends, half-finished stories that trailed into silence before picking up again. I tried ignoring him, keeping my eyes closed, my breathing slow like maybe he believed I was asleep. But his words kept coming, more fragmented, more personal. At first, it was random confessions about fights he'd been in, people he didn't like, mistakes he'd made. I told myself he was drunk, that none of it meant anything. Then his voice shifted, lower, colder. "You know," he said, "I killed my grandfather once." The words sliced through the fog of my half-sleep. My eyes snapped open. He didn't sound like he was joking. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He just kept talking, his tone flat, almost casual. He was cruel to my mom, always treated her like trash. One day I'd had enough. Shot him. Didn't regret it then. Don't regret it now. My skin prickled with heat and cold all at once. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but my body felt paralyzed. I turned my head slowly toward him, and the look on his face made my stomach drop. He wasn't grinning, wasn't fishing for a reaction. His eyes were glazed from the alcohol, but his words were steady, stripped of emotion like he'd rehearsed them in his head for years. I knew, deep down, he wasn't lying. By then, he'd inched closer, his arm brushing mine under the blanket. I shifted away until I was hanging off the side of the bed, my heart racing, so hard it made me lightheaded. He didn't move back. He just lay there, silent now, like the confession itself had emptied him. His breath slowed, though his eyes stayed open longer than mine could handle. I couldn't take it. I bolted upright, muttered something about finding my brother, and left the room without looking back. My hands shook as I shook Chris awake in the living room. He mumbled something about me being paranoid, about Aaron probably just talking nonsense, but I didn't care. I refused to go back in there. Aaron eventually passed out alone in the guest bed. I didn't see him much after that. Maybe once or twice, at another party or two. Each time, he blended into the crowd easily, like he hadn't once peeled back his skin and shown me what lived underneath. But the last time left a mark. My parents were out of town, and Chris and I threw a small gathering at our place. Aaron showed up, blending into the crowd like always. He wasn't loud or obnoxious, but something about him felt heavier now, more dangerous because of what I knew. He leaned against the kitchen counter, talking to people casually, laughing at the right moments, sipping a drink. To everyone else, he was just another face in the room. To me, he was the boy who whispered murder into the dark. Not long after that night, my dad realized two of his guns, a shotgun and a pistol, were missing from under his bed. Panic rippled through the house. We suspected a kid from school, someone who dealt drugs, but my dad wasn't the type to let it go. He hired a private investigator. Weeks later, the investigator reported back. The guns had been pawned illegally and traced back to someone who had already skipped town. He'd left for Canada the very next day. And that someone, of course, was Aaron. That confirmation, the theft on top of his drunken confession, cemented what I'd already felt in my gut. He wasn't just a troubled guy who drank too much. He was dangerous. He'd show me a piece of himself that night, one I wish I could erase from my memory, but can't. Even now, when I think about it, I hear his voice in the dark, slur but steady, repeating words that never should have come out of someone's mouth so casually. I killed my grandfather. I don't regret it. And the scariest part isn't just what he said. It's how much I believe him. When I was 16, life already felt like it was splitting down the middle. My parents' divorce had been finalized a few months earlier, and the fallout from it seemed to seep into every part of the house. Nothing felt steady anymore. One week my dad would try to smooth things over. The next my mom would lash out about money or control. It was like standing on a bridge you knew was going to collapse, just waiting for it to finally give way. My name's Ryan, and I don't think I'll ever forget the night my mom nearly destroyed us. The evening started in a way that almost felt normal. I had my girlfriend over, plus two of my friends from school. We were in my room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, swapping stories and half laughing about inside jokes that wouldn't make sense to anyone else. For a little while, I managed to forget the tension downstairs, the constant tug-of-war between my parents that had bled into every day since November. The four of us sat surrounded by soda cans, empty chip bags, and the low hum of music playing from a Bluetooth speaker. I remember feeling grateful in a small, quiet way, like maybe the storm had passed for the night. Then the yelling started. At first, I thought it was the TV. My dad sometimes turned it up loud when sports were on, but then the sound sharpened, echoing through the floorboards, and I knew exactly who it was. My mom. Her voice had this unmistakable edge, hoarse, angry, pitched high in a way that made it carry through walls. I shot up to my feet, my heart tightening. My friends glanced at me nervously, and my girlfriend whispered, "Is that your mom?" I didn't answer. In the kitchen, the scene unfolded like something out of a nightmare. My mom stood near the island, her hands clenched into fists, shouting at Helen, my dad's girlfriend. Helen, who had been nothing but kind to me and my siblings, just stood there frozen, her back against the counter. Her face was pale, her shoulders rigid, like she was bracing herself against every insult being thrown at her. "You don't belong here," my mom screamed. "Get out of my house, you bitch." Her words slammed against the walls, each one nastier than the last. My chest burned, caught between wanting to defend Helen and just wishing my mom would stop. I stepped into the room, my voice rising as I told her to leave. She looked right at me, eyes blazing, and spat out, "No, fuck you." The shock of it made my stomach twist, but I snapped back before I could stop myself. "Fuck you," I yelled, louder than I'd ever yelled at her before. My throat tightened immediately after, my voice trembling with both anger and fear. For a moment, the room went silent except for the sound of my own breathing. Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, dialing 911. But by the time I explained what happened, she was gone. I stood there staring at the empty doorway, Helen still pressed against the counter, tears welling in her eyes. My dad muttered something under his breath, something about she's lost it, but none of us said much more. The tension hung in the air long after the sound of her car faded down the street. That night, things calmed down. My friends stayed, my dad grilled burgers in the backyard, and the smell of barbecue hung in the air like a reminder of how good things could be when the chaos wasn't swallowing us whole. We sat at the picnic table under the yellow porch light, eating too much and laughing about old stories. My siblings ran around with sparklers, their laughter cutting through the heavy memory of earlier. For the first time in a while, it felt like we were just a family again, patched together, fragile, but still whole. By midnight, my girlfriend and I retreated upstairs. We lay tangled together on my bed, whispering quietly before drifting off. Her breathing slowed into deep, heavy rhythms, but I tossed and turned, my mind still buzzing with the image of my mom in the kitchen, her face twisted with rage. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't know why. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of wood settling. I blinked in the dark, my eyes adjusting to the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. My chest rose and fell quickly, as if my body sensed something my mind hadn't caught yet. Then my bedroom door opened. A figure slipped inside, closing the door with deliberate slowness. The sound of the latch clicking shut made my skin prickle. I sat up, my chest tight, whispering, "Who's there?" The person didn't answer. The mask over their face obscured their expression, but I didn't need to see all of it. The shape of her jaw, the way her shoulders squared. It was my mom, and in her right hand, she held a knife. For what felt like forever, she just stood there, staring at me. My pulse roared in my ears, and I could barely breathe. The knife hung loosely at her side, but that didn't make it less terrifying. My girlfriend slept through it, her back to the door, completely unaware of what was happening just feet away. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, silently begging her not to step closer. My hands trembled under the blanket, every muscle screaming to bolt, but my legs felt cemented to the mattress. After what felt like centuries, she finally turned. Without a word, she opened the door and slipped out. I heard the sound of the front door creaking open, then closing again, followed by silence that pressed against my chest like a weight. I sat frozen until my legs finally gave way beneath me. My breath came in shallow bursts as I stumbled down the hall, checking on my siblings one by one, then on my dad and Helen. They were all asleep, untouched, unaware of how close we had come to something irreversible. I stood in their doorways, watching the rise and fall of their breathing, trying to convince myself they were safe. The next morning, when I told them what happened, nobody believed me. My dad insisted I must have been dreaming. Helen said maybe I was just on edge after the fight earlier. Even my friends shrugged it off when I mentioned it, their faces shifting uncomfortably like they didn't want to get involved. But I know what I saw. I saw my mom in the doorway, a knife glinting in the low light, her silence louder than any scream. I saw the choice she had, standing there with us vulnerable and sleeping, and I saw her walk away. That moment replayed in my head for weeks. The way her hand gripped the knife, the way her eyes never softened, the deliberate slowness of her movements. To this day, I don't speak to her. Not because of what she said in the kitchen, not even because of what she's done since the divorce, but because I know she's capable of crossing that line again. And the next time, she might not stop herself. I don't trust the quiet anymore, not when it comes from her. That night sits inside me like a shadow I can't shake. Because the truth is, my mother could have killed us. She didn't, but she thought about it. And that's enough to keep me awake long after the house has gone quiet.